I want to build my muscles, Layne, like
Yes,
your
sir.
muscles. I want muscles like yours. Question on the way that I'm working out, just sort of practical advice. Do I have to work out to sort of overload till I fail to build my muscles so that they're like yours?
Great question. So, if I had to say how to build muscles like me, you
What,
gotta
you
train
just put
for
your biceps on the
three
table?
hours, 3 hours a day.
Can we use AI to shrink them?
Stephen just having the biggest arms in the podcast. What matters for building muscle, we think, we have the amount of hypertrophy research in the last 10 years has absolutely exploded compared to what it was before. And hypertrophy is muscle growth is what we're talking about. What seems to be the cause of it is what's called mechanical tension. So just creating a lot of tension on the muscle, because now we're actually having studies coming out. We're doing like hard stretching. They actually see increased muscle growth from like sustained hard stretching. There was a study done with the calf muscles. So they put them in this contraption where basically they're like stretching their calves and holding it there. I think, I can't remember what the duration was, but it was a long time, right? And they were comparing that to traditional resistance training. And it was a pretty painful stretch. I think they said it was like a 7 or 8 or 9 out of 10 in terms of pain level for this stretch. But they built as much muscle as people who were doing calves 3 times a week, resistance training. I think they were doing these stretches every day. So it was pretty intense. But that's really interesting, right? Because even if you don't have weight, you can still create that tension through stretching, right? Now the stretching, again, not your traditional it's pretty intense and pretty painful. I would argue that resistance training is probably a more practical methodology to getting it and more fun. But in terms of mechanical tension, it does to maximize muscle growth. So we always have to be careful about like a lot of things could cause muscle growth, but if we're talking about absolutely maxing muscle growth, you do have to get close to volitional failure, which is basically like if I'm doing, say, a bicep curl, right? Or maybe a bench press, better example. I'm doing reps, that's failure, right?
Okay.
The research suggests you don't have to go to failure, but you have to get pretty darn close within a couple reps, And if you've never trained to failure, it's actually really hard to know what that feels like.
Yeah.
And so like in research studies where they take people who are beginner intermediate and they ask them, like they have them do a set and they ask them, hey, how many more reps could have you gotten? They underestimate by like 5.
Yeah. Especially difficult when you're training alone. Something like bench press. If I fail, the thing back it fucks. So I'm like, I've put in a buffer of maybe 3 reps there just so that I don't embarrass myself in front of,
Exactly. Mechanical tension appears to be cumulative. And what I mean by that is if it was just about creating as much tension as possible, just load the bar up and just do 1 rep, right? So it's cumulative throughout a set. Now, the way I like to describe it is intensity is the medicine and the number of hard sets, which number of sets close to failure, is the dosage. Now, when you first start, you can get results on a very low dosage because your body has literally done nothing. It'll grow off anything. As you progress, remember when you first started lifting, you'd add 5-10 pounds every week, right? Like clockwork. Well, eventually you can't add that anymore, right? But you can still, a lot of times you can increase the reps, right? With the same weight. Well, eventually you can't do that anymore. So how do you continue to progress? Well, you can add more hard sets. And
what do you mean by hard sets?
Volume. So for example, let's just take bench press again, right? Like, let's say I'm doing 3 sets close to failure and I eventually stop progressing. I can add another set. And that is still another form of progressive overload, right? Because again, mechanical tension is cumulative. And there's some debate about this in the resistance training field, but for the most part, I would say it's generally agreed upon by most experts that higher volumes improve muscle growth relative to lower volumes, meaning more hard sets. And it doesn't really seem to matter about machines versus free weights either. Seem to cause equal kinds of muscle growth. So when it comes to building muscle, the cool thing is you got a lot of options. And if you have pain doing one thing, joint pain, whatever, lower back pain, try something else.
Fantastic news for me. Layne, we have a closing tradition on this podcast
Okay.
where the last guest leaves a question for the next guest, not knowing who they're going to leave it for. And the question that's been left for you,
Ooh, I like this. I know what my question will be.
your one's a really difficult one.
Okay.
So I don't get to see it until I open this book, but Jack has a little peek before I ask the guests.
Was it
But
Andy?
yours, no, it actually wasn't Andy, because there was
Okay.
one person between them, and they're the person that left this question for you.
Gotcha.
Very difficult question, I think. Have you ever stayed in a relationship that was harming you, and why?
Yeah. Because of a lot of reasons. One being perception from other people. I felt like I had to make it work. The other being because of some of the remnants of bullying. I found it very hard to trust myself in personal relationships I could be easily talked into me being the problem for everything. And I'm not saying that I was never the problem, because I definitely was. I've made a lot of mistakes in personal relationships, and I've had my own toxic behaviors that I know I do. But yes, I have definitely stayed in a relationship too long. And I think one of the hardest things for me and for a lot of people is knowing when is it time to give up and when is it time to push through. And I don't think anybody has a clear parameter. But for me, staying in was not trusting myself, not trusting my gut, and feeling like I had to make it work.
Because of the kids, or because of this, or because of whatever?
Because of a whole host of many things. And again, I think I'm not a relationship expert, but I've gone to therapy for 8 years now. One of my good friends, John Deloney, is an expert on this, and very rarely does a relationship break down because of just one person. It's usually a dynamic. But I think that is one of the hardest things to figure out. When is it time? Because we talked about like not quitting, these sorts of things, but there's also like, sometimes it's not quitting. It's just moving on to possibly something better. Right. And learning from what happened. And yeah, that is a really tough question. And, I've definitely stayed in things too long, and not just like romantic relationships, but also like business partnerships, friendships, where it became highly toxic. And again, I think the next hardest thing to do after that is looking back and going, what did I contribute to that?
Layne, in my life, I've lost people. I've lost a lot of, people along the way, from, grandparents, friends. A lady who was sort of my proxy mother when I was younger, died in a motorcycle accident. And it's only in those moments that you kind of have the regrets of all the things that you could have said. You wish you could go back. And often for people somewhat similar to me, somewhat maybe similar to you, who have had struggles with expressing their emotions, we probably have the greatest amount of regret because we found it harder to maybe tell these people when we had the chance. So my closing question for you, which is a question of my own, is if right now you could send a message to your kids, and I'm going to let you send one as well to your granddad and your dad, and it was the last thing you were going to say, what would you say?
Okay. My kids, I would say, of course, I love you more than anything. God dang it. You fulfilled a hole in my life I didn't know I had. And I wish I could go back and do a lot of things differently, but I love you more than anything. And I don't care what you do with your life. Find something that you love and that is a positive contributor to the world, and go do that. And try to make somebody else's life better along the way. And to my dad, I would say, thank you, like, for not following in your dad's footsteps and not like stepping in front of that wildfire and saying, not on my watch. Sorry. My dad's not perfect, but both my mom and dad are really great people. And, they've struggled with some health issues. If I had to say one thing, it would be, thanks for always believing in me, always having my back, accepting me for who I was. In some ways, I feel like they're the only people who always accepted me for who I was. And they never put expectations on me for what I want to do with my life. When I told them I wanted to get into bodybuilding, they were like, oh, this seems weird, but okay. When my first bodybuilding show, they were the loudest people up there supporting me, they're, when I won Worlds in 2022, I was going through a very hard personal time in my life. Basically the front end of a divorce, and it had just kind of come to a head. Like just the whirlwind kind of chaos stuff. And my mom called me. They were watching online, with my kids. And my mom was like, son, how the hell did you just do that? With everything going on in your life, how did you do that? And, they've just always been such big supporters of me, even when they didn't understand. My mom didn't understand, like, what are you studying again? What are you studying again? But, came to my PhD exit seminar. Mom was in every baseball game growing up. Dad was on the road a lot, but, but came to everything he could. They showed up for me a lot, and I knew I was loved. And so if I had to say anything to them, it would just be thank you for everything that you did. And when I had kids, I was like 6 weeks in, I called my mom. I'm like, oh my God, you did all this stuff for me and I gave you all that grief. I'm so sorry, So yeah, they're amazing. And if I had to say something to my grandfather, it would just be, God, I would give, somebody asked me this the other day. I would give anything to have 5 more minutes with my granddad and ask him so many questions about life that I just didn't know enough about to even ask the question, because the man just oozed wisdom, but if I had to say anything, I would just say, thanks for what you did for your family. My grandfather, when he passed, this is a man who had he had his first heart attack in his 50s, and this back in the late 1970s, when open heart surgery was like carpentry. His life expectation, I think, was 5 years at the time. He was in the Battle of the Bulge, the deadliest battle in World War II. One more story. I forget what country he was in, but he was supposed to go on leave the next day, and a convoy was coming through, and it was going to the place where he was going to go on leave, right behind the lines. And his commanding officer said, hey, why don't you just take it? Just go today. That night, a German soldier dropped a grenade down and killed his entire unit. And sorry. Dang, I didn't think you'd give me to cry on this podcast, man. So much. And he said, after that day, I was living on borrowed time, in my opinion. He's like, I should have been down there. And he said, I get up every day, I look at the obituary, and if I'm not in it, I figure I'm good for another day. And he had, I think, 3 heart attacks, 3 open heart surgeries, 2 strokes. He had a boat fall on him. Long story. So this guy, we always joked he had 9 lives. And whenever he was on his deathbed, it was we knew like 6 weeks in advance. He had kind of multi-system failure, just basically old age. And it never occurred to me, I was 20 years old. 22. It never occurred to me the idea of how you die as being so important. And he went exactly how you would draw it up. He was in the hospice, so he was at his home. His whole family was around him. And again, he was the funniest man I ever knew. And I walked in and all the seats are taken. And he's still lucid talking. And I said, he had his little like portable toilet, but he hadn't been using it, whatever. The seat was down. And I said, do you mind if I sit here? Because I was going to sit next to him. And he said, yeah, you can't clog that one up, because I was known in my family for clogging toilets, right? So he's still cracking jokes on his deathbed. And even like the doctor asked him when he was basically the doctor telling him, hey, you've got like 6 weeks left. Doctor said, hey, you're an organ donor, but we can't really use anything. It's all bad, basically. Would you be interested in donating your body as a cadaver for med students? He goes, yeah, I always wanted to go to med school. I figured it's the only way I'm getting there now. So just like had this great outlook on life, and just when he passed, I remember my mom looking at him and saying, it's okay, Dad. It's okay. We're going to be okay. And I wasn't even sad, because I'm like, that guy, he got every bit out of it. He milked life for everything he had a great family, and so many people who loved him. And if I could just have that kind of impact, even half that impact on my family, oh man, that'd be worth so much to me. So I would just tell him, thank you for being an inspiration.
If you love the Diary of a CEO brand and you watch this channel, please do me a huge favor. Become part of the 15% of the viewers on this channel that have hit the subscribe button. It helps us tremendously, and the bigger the channel gets, the bigger the guests.